when I was growing up, arcades were relatively popular. And a lot of places you went to had lots of 2D fighters. And there were two companies that almost epitomized the world of 2D fighting when it came to the more cartoony style. You had Capcom with the Street Fighter series, which is an amazing series. You know, from Street Fighter, well, actually Fighting Street to Street Fighter 2 to Turbo to Super to Alpha, the whole Alpha series by itself, Marvel versus Street Fighter, Capcom versus Marvel. I mean, that company does a tremendous amount of games. And then the other side, you had SNK. SNK had a similar style of gameplay. Normally the characters had more moves. They had super attacks that were more difficult to pull off. Normally it'd be like half circle forward, quarter circle back, punch button. In the other series you had Art of Fighting. You also had the Fatal Fury series, the King of Fighters series, which actually combined multiple ones. And then they ended up with things like Goro, Mark of the Wolf, and then later on they actually combined for Capcom versus SNK. The biggest problem is sometimes the SNK games, I also thought like World Heroes too, but almost nobody cares about that game. The biggest one with the SNK games, they took a lot of the same moves, and certain characters felt like direct rip-offs. Normally out of their game style and how they played, so we're going to look at two specific characters. Ryu, or Ryu, is by far one of the most popular male characters in the Street Fighter series. Initially, when you first saw him in Fighting Street, he was identical to Ken. Street Fighter 2, again, very much identical to the moveset of Ken. Over time, Ken became the faster fighter, with a more impressive Dragon Punch. More on the other side, Ryu became the guy who just mastered the fireball and had lots of more just devastating attacks. On the other side, for Art of Fighting, you had Ryu. Yes, I know, they just changed the letter. Now, Ryu initially was very similar to how a person called Robert Garcia played. So you kind of had the two different characters from that aspect. But Ryu had an entirely different fighting style. And when they initially had it, he had a fireball that was a slightly longer range. Over time, his fireball became kind of like a burst from his hand. Identical to what happens with Dan. Dan Hibiki, a character in Street Fighter towards the end of the series, was somebody who was created to kind of make fun of the different SNK sort of characters. So you got a guy who's who's closer to Ken in Ryu, but since his name is one letter off from Ryu, people tend to compare these two directly. Now with this one, I couldn't use my standard 9-point system, because it's kind of hard to do invulnerability and durability in people who've actually fought in a video game series. So instead I had to read their backgrounds, as well as watch a lot of YouTube footage of them fighting, to try to get a real good understanding. Now, I'm taking Ryu and all the Capcom characters from not from their versus Marvel times. Because, that's where they were fighting much larger and much more devastating opponents. And the Shinku Hadouken that he does in those sorts of games is kind of... it's a massive cannon of energy coming from him, and that would pretty much destroy anybody. So, his Shinku Hadouken, it's pretty much like a Kamehameha wave. And it's a lot more powerful. So I'm picking them kind of from their Capcom versus SNK, where they're pretty much put at a similar power level. I'm doing this with experience, their in-close fighting, their mid-range fighting, strength, speed, their energy projections, and their overall versatility. So we'll get started. When it comes to experience, while they both have a lot of it, Ryu actually has been training for longer. And he actually had his first series of fights was a couple years before Ryu had his. In close fighting. If you watch the way they fight, Ryu is entirely a speed in close fighter. And he has got a lot of tremendous up close moves. He's got kind of like the 100-hand slap. So he's somebody who likes to be in close and does a lot of damage that way. At your mid-range, it is definitely Ryu. Ryu doesn't have a lot of speed at this point in time. He is pretty much a knockout shot. He is, I want to keep you at full distance, and I'm going to beat you with like 1 to 2 hits. No reason to get in close. Now we're looking at strength. At this point in time, Ryu is entirely a strength character. Whether it comes to the Hurricane Kick, which is a knockdown shot, his Dragon Punch, which isn't a multiple hitter, it's a knockdown shot, his Fireballs, which again are knockdown shots, he is a knockdown guy. Speed. This is Ryu. When you watch the way he fights, he very much fights like the way Ken does later on in the series. Lots of multiple hit moves, lots of just speed, lots of I want to cover the ground fast and get in close and wail on you. Energy projection. In this one, it's kind of a catch-22. You know, when you look at the fireballs that Ryu has, they're not really far, but they're decent setup moves. But he also has a much larger fireball. You know, he has a one-fist fireball, and then he has a double-fist fireball, which is a much larger projectile. And he, of course, is one of the people to first start having something along that line. However, the much larger projectile still takes one hit to get rid of. So from that aspect, I do have to kind of give the benefit of this to what you see from Ryu. Ryu, he's got his regular Hadouken, he's got his red Hadouken, which is a stun, he's got his Shingo Hadouken, which in most of the games is just a super version of his Fireball. So he's got one that's a stun, one that's a full range, and another that's a multiple hit. Even with a larger Fireball projectile coming from Ryu, it still is a one hit. It's an impressive hit, but any Fireball can absorb it and take it out. Now we're down to straight up versatility. In this one, the biggest problem with Ryu, as he got later on, is his Dragon Uppercut sort of move is not as impressive. It doesn't seem to have near as much range. You do see a lot more range on Ryu's. So when it comes to the overall versatility, you know, you've got knockdown hits, you've got stuns, you've got a lot of impressive moves, and almost every move that he's got has got a super version of it. So we're going to give this one to Ryu. It's a problem with you guys being so close in names. So if these two guys were to fight, I'm looking at this one being a 5-2. Ryu should be able to beat Ryu pretty easily the vast majority of the time. If this fight gets in close, it's definitely a Ryu fight. If this fight stays at a distance, this has got Ken written all over it. Sorry, it's got Ryu written all over it.